The smoke had not yet cleared. It hung over the castle ruins in greasy, low-bellied coils, threaded through with the copper stink of blood and the sharper bite of smouldering cedar beams. Miko knelt in the inner courtyard, her knees grinding into ash and shattered roof tile, and watched her father prepare to die. Takeda Hiroshi was a man carved from winter mountains, broad-shouldered even in defeat, his grey-streaked hair pulled back from a face webbed with fine scars. The white death robe he wore was already spotted pink where old wounds had reopened during the final assault. He was her father. He was the last loyal general of the Toyotomi, and in the space of a single sunrise, Osaka Castle had become his funeral pyre. "Turn your head, daughter," he said, his voice steady in a way that made her chest ache. "No." The word cracked out of her before she could soften it. Hiroshi allowed himself the ghost of a smile. He drew the short blade from his sash, not his katana, which lay broken somewhere on the eastern wall, but the tanto, the one he had carried since his own father, placed it in his boyhood hands. The blade was straight and unadorned, its only ornament a single copper inlay near the grip. A water dragon coiled in an endless circle. "Miko." He held the tanto flat across both palms, an offering. "This blade holds my last prayer. Do not let hatred tarnish it. Let it carve only what must." She took it. The rayskin grip was still warm from his body. She wanted to say something, to pour out the 17 years of love and stubborn argument and quiet pride that had passed between them. But her throat had closed to a pinprick. He saw it. He always saw it. "Go now, through the postern gate by the old storehouse. The Tokugawa scouts have not found it yet. Find the refugee column heading east. And do not look back." She did not go. She stayed on her knees in the ash and watched her father lower himself onto the stained tatami mat that his second had laid out moments before. She watched him wrap the tanto's blade in paper, leaving only the tip exposed. She watched the muscles of his stomach go taut as he positioned the point. His second, old Lieutenant Fujita, whose left arm ended at the elbow in a crusted bandage, raised his sword and waited. Miko did not turn her head. The blade went in. Hiroshi drew it across his belly in a single controlled line. His breath hissed through clenched teeth, but no cry escaped him. For 3 heartbeats, silence. Then Fujita's sword came down and it was finished. Miko did not scream. Screaming would announce her to the patrols already picking through the lower baileys. Instead, she pressed her forehead to the ash until her skin burned, and then she rose. Her hands moved without her telling them to. She pulled the pin from her hair and let it fall around her shoulders. Long black, the one vanity she had ever permitted herself. The tanto's edge was so keen it seemed to drink the light. She gathered her hair in one fist and sawed through it in 3 rough strokes. The severed strands scattered across the courtyard, mingling with the ash. An hour later, Koji walked among the refugees. The transformation had been crude but sufficient. She had cut her hair to a ragged boy's crop, bound her chest with strips torn from a dead soldier's undershirt, and stripped a young monk's corpse of its black robes. The monk, barely older than her, his throat opened by a splinter of wood during the bombardment, had no more use for them. She whispered an apology to his spirit as she took the straw traveling hat and the worn wooden prayer beads as well. The eastern road was choked with survivors. Farmers clutching children, merchants who had lost everything in the sack, wounded Ashigaru limping on makeshift crutches. "Miko Koji," she corrected herself. "Koji now, think only of Koji." Kept her head bowed beneath the hat's wide brim and joined the flow. She carried the tanto against her ribs, wrapped in silk and pressed flat beneath her robes. Every step she took, she felt it there. The last warm thing in a world gone cold. The first night she saw him, she had collapsed among a cluster of refugees camped in a burned-out shrine half a league from the castle. Exhaustion dragged her under like a stone in deep water. But the dream, when it came, was not a dream. Her father knelt in the center of the shrine's ruined sanctuary. Moonlight fell through the shattered roof and pooled around him, except it was not moonlight. It was blood, spreading in a perfect crimson circle that stopped exactly at the edge of his shadow. He wore the same white robe, the same seppuku wound gaping dark across his midsection. His eyes were open. They were fixed on her. "Miko," he said, and his voice was the sound of wind through winter reeds. She tried to stand, tried to run to him, but her body was not hers to command. She could only kneel across from him, frozen, as the blood crept closer. "I cannot rest," the ghost said. "The betrayal has not been answered." "Who?" she whispered. "Father, who betrayed you?" His mouth opened. His lips shaped a name, a sound, something that trembled on the edge of audibility. But no voice came. The blood rose around him, swallowing his knees, his hands, his chest. He reached toward her and she saw that his fingers were clutching not air but a shape, a crest half-formed, smeared with gore so she could not read it. "Find," he gasped, and then the blood took him and he was gone. Miko woke with her heart slamming against her ribs and the taste of iron on her tongue. The shrine was dark. The refugees around her slept on, oblivious. She touched her face and found it wet with tears she did not remember shedding. "I will not let his spirit wander unavenged," she breathed, shaping the words like a vow into the darkness. "Even if I must become a shadow, I will cut a path back to honor." The Shogun patrol found her on the third day. She had fallen behind the main column, her legs too heavy and her stomach too empty to keep pace. The road had narrowed into a forest track lined with cryptomeria, their trunks straight as temple pillars. She heard the horses before she saw them. 4 riders moving at a walk, their Jingasa helmets glinting through the trees, Tokugawa scouts. Hunting survivors of the Toyotomi command, Miko pressed herself against a tree and forced her breathing to slow. The tanto was a hard line against her ribs. She could not outrun horsemen. She could not fight 4 armed men. A 17-year-old boy monk with a dagger had no chance. And if they searched her closely enough to discover she was not a boy at all, it would be worse. She stepped out onto the road. The lead rider pulled up short, his horse snorting and sidestepping. He was a hard-faced man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, and he wore the triple hollyhock crest of the Tokugawa on his chest plate. The scout behind him, leaner, younger, with a bow already half-drawn, studied her with open suspicion. "You there?" The lead rider's voice was bored, the voice of a man who had spent days searching rubble and found only ghosts. Name and purpose. Miko pressed her palms together and bowed low, letting the straw hat hide her face. "This humble one is called Koji," she said, pitching her voice to the middle range she had practiced for 3 days straight. "A novice of the mountain temple at Yoshino. I was visiting the castle to bring offerings when the attack came. You were inside the castle." The archer's eyes narrowed. "Outside the walls, merciful lord, I fled before the gates fell." She kept her head down. "I am no warrior. I carry only prayer beads." The lead rider studied her for a long moment. His gaze traveled over her tonsured scalp. No, not tonsured, just hacked short and ragged. The hair of a mourner, not a monk. His eyes flicked to her face, her throat, the way her robes hung across her shoulders. "Show me your hands." She held them out. The calluses were in the wrong places for a boy who had never held a sword. She knew that, knew it with a sick certainty. But the rider only grunted. "You see any Toyotomi officers on this road, monk?" "No, lord, only farmers and merchants." The scar-faced rider was already looking past her, down the road. She was beneath his interest. "Move on then, and pray the Tokugawa show more mercy than your gods did." She bowed again, lower this time, and stepped aside. The riders passed without a backward glance. Miko stood in the road until the sound of hooves faded into the forest, and then she allowed herself to breathe. The dying man was propped against a stone lantern at a crossroads 2 days later. He wore the remnants of a Toyotomi infantry uniform, and the wound in his side had blackened past any hope of healing. Miko knelt beside him with water from her gourd, though she knew it would not save him. His eyes, glassy with fever, found her face and held there. "You," he rasped, "you have the Takeda look. The generals get?" She did not deny it. The dying deserved truth. He coughed, and the sound was wet and broken. "Listen to me. There was a man, Matsuda Kaito. He fought beside your father. Sworn brothers they were." He drew a shuddering breath, but Kaito cut a deal with the Tokugawa scouts, fed them the castle's weak points, the postern gates, the watch rotations, everything. The name hit her like a physical blow. Matsuda Kaito. The man her father had called brother. The man who had sat at their hearth, who had taught her to skip stones across the river, who had laughed at her father's terrible poetry and poured his sake when he was too proud to ask. "Kaito is alive?" Her voice came out strange, flattened. "Alive and rich. The shogun pays well for traitors." The soldier's hand found her wrist, his grip shockingly strong for a man so close to death. "Your father died because Kaito sold him. Every man on that wall died because Kaito sold them." He died with his hand still clamped around her arm. Miko closed his eyes and spoke a prayer to Jizo for his passage. And then she rose from beside the stone lantern. In her chest where grief had been, something else was kindling, something hot and focused and merciless. "Matsuda Kaito," she said to the empty crossroads, testing the name. It tasted like ash and iron. She began to walk, east, toward the mountains, toward the temple at Yoshino, where no one would question a young monk named Koji, with a tanto hidden beneath his robes and a ghost kneeling in the chambers of his heart. She would find him. She would learn the truth. And she would carve whatever needed to be carved. The road climbed into the foothills, and the cryptomeria gave way to twisted pines clutching at granite bones. Miko walked until her legs burned and the sun slid behind the western ridges, painting the sky the color of a day-old bruise. She had not eaten since the rice ball she'd stolen from a dead man's satchel that morning, and her stomach had passed beyond hunger into a hollow, floating ache. The shrine appeared between one switchback and the next, a tumble-down structure wedged into a cleft in the rock, its torii gate listing like a drunkard. Half the roof had collapsed, and what remained was thick with moss. But a thin ribbon of cook smoke curled from behind the broken wall, and Miko's feet carried her toward it before her mind could weigh the danger. She found him seated in the ruins of the main hall, legs folded beneath him, palms resting on his knees. An old man in patched grey robes, his head shaved clean and gleaming in the last of the daylight. His face was a map of gentle creases, and his eyes were closed, though Miko had the uncomfortable sense that he had been watching her approach long before she rounded the corner. Beside him, a small clay pot bubbled over a meager fire. He opened his eyes. They were the pale brown of weak tea, and they held no surprise at all. "You walk like someone carrying more than a satchel," he said. His voice was dry as autumn leaves. "Sit. The rice is almost done." Miko hesitated in the gap where the shrine door had once stood. The straw hat hid her face, but not her hesitation. She was Koji now, a boy, a novice, a nobody. Boys did not flinch at kindness. She bowed, deeper than necessary, and stepped inside. "This one is grateful, honored uncle." The old monk's mouth twitched. "Brother Eiji, no need for honors. The mountain provides, and I am merely its cook." He gestured at the pot with a wooden ladle. "You are bound for Yoshino?" The question was casual, but Miko felt its weight. She knelt across the fire from him, careful to keep her movements small, her shoulders broad. "Yes, to study. A young monk traveling alone, after a battle." Brother Eiji ladled rice into a cracked bowl and held it out. "That is either great faith or great necessity." Miko took the bowl. The rice was plain, unsalted, and it was the finest thing she had ever tasted. She ate with the mechanical focus of someone who had learned that food was not to be questioned, only accepted. "Necessity," she said, when the bowl was half empty. Brother Eiji nodded as though she had confirmed something he already knew. His own bowl sat untouched beside him. "The eastern road is thick with Tokugawa scouts. They stop every traveler, search every bundle. A boy alone makes an easy target. I passed a patrol this morning. They let me go." "Did they?" The old monk's eyes drifted to her hands, wrapped around the bowl. Miko fought the urge to pull them into her sleeves. "Then the Buddha was watching over you." He did not press further. Instead, he ate his rice in silence, and when the bowls were empty, he rinsed them with water from a gourd and tucked them into his pack. The fire burned low, and the pines whispered secrets to the night wind. "I am walking the pilgrimage road to Kyoto," Brother Eiji said, settling back against a fallen beam. "Yoshino lies on the way. If you wish for company, I would not refuse it. These mountains grow lonely after dark." Miko thought of the dream that had torn her from sleep the night before. Her father's ghost, his wound bleeding that perfect crimson circle, his mouth shaping a name she could not hear. She thought of walking another road alone, counting her hatred like prayer beads. "I would be grateful," she said. They set out at dawn. The morning mist clung to the valleys like a burial shroud, and Brother Eiji walked with the steady, unhurried pace of a man who had measured his life not in miles but in steps. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words landed with a peculiar weight, as though each one had been polished by long consideration. "There is a story," he said, as they descended into a cedar grove where the light fell in green-gold shafts, about a young samurai who sought vengeance for his murdered lord. He trained for years. He sacrificed everything, his family, his name, his peace. And when at last he stood over his enemy with blade drawn, he found only an old man, blind and toothless, who did not even remember the crime. Miko kept her eyes on the path. The tanto pressed against her ribs with each step, a small, constant reminder. And what did the samurai do? He killed him anyway. Brother Eiji ducked under a low branch and spent the rest of his life wondering why the act brought him no relief. The ghost he was feeding had already consumed him. Perhaps the samurai was not feeding a ghost. Miko's voice came out flatter than she intended. Perhaps he was feeding honor. Ah, honor. The old monk said the word like it was a piece of fruit he was testing for rot. "A blade can cut flesh or cut away delusion. Which edge you choose, young one, is a choice no ghost can make for you." Miko said nothing. The cedar needles muffled their footsteps, and for a long while the only sound was the distant rush of a stream somewhere below the ridge. The vision came without warning. One moment she was walking behind Brother Eiji, watching the sway of his grey robes. The next, the forest dissolved into a wash of pink and white, cherry blossoms. They drifted through air that was warm and golden, and beneath a tree heavy with blooms, two men sat laughing, her father younger, unmarked by war. his hair still black as riverstone, raised a sake cup to the man across from him, and that man, she knew him even before her mind could supply the name. Matsuda Kaito, not the traitor, not yet. Just a rangy young warrior with a wolf's grin and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. His hair was pulled back in a rough tail, and his hands were quick and clever as he refilled her father's cup. "To the end of days, brother," Kaito said, and his voice was warm with affection. "To the end of days," her father answered. They drank. The blossoms fell, and then the petals darkened, curled, became drops of blood that splattered against her father's face, streaking down his scarred cheek. The tree split down the middle, blackened and rotten, and Kaito's grin twisted into something else, something cold and calculating. His hand, still holding the sake flask, was wet with red. Her father turned to look at her, and his eyes were the eyes of the ghost in the shrine. "You hesitate," he said, though his lips did not move. "While the man who sold my life drinks Tokugawa wine and sleeps on silk, my daughter walks disguised and does nothing." "I am not doing nothing," Miko tried to say, but her voice was a child's voice, thin and useless. "Then prove it." The scene shattered. She was back on the mountain path, on her knees, and Brother Iji's hand was on her shoulder. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her face was wet, with tears or sweat. She could not tell. "You fell." The old monk's voice was calm, but his grip was firm. "Are you ill?" "No." Miko pulled away and forced herself upright. The tanto had shifted against her ribs. She could feel its outline through the silk wrapping. "I am fine. It was nothing. A dizzy spell." Brother Eiji studied her for a long moment. His eyes flicked to her chest, where her hand had instinctively pressed against the hidden blade, and then back to her face. He did not ask. "There is a village ahead," he said. "We will rest there." The patrol caught them at the bottom of the valley, where the road flattened and the trees thinned. 6 riders this time, not 4. Their armor was lacquered black with the triple hollyhock crest in gold, and their horses were fresh and well fed. The captain dismounted first, a man with a jaw like a grinding stone and a nose that had been broken at least twice. He wore a katana at his hip and a wakizashi thrust through his sash, and he looked at travelers the way a butcher looks at livestock. "Halt!" He planted himself in the middle of the road. "Names and business." Brother Eiji pressed his palms together and bowed. "This unworthy one is called Eiji, a monk of the 5 Mountains tradition. I am on pilgrimage to the great temple at Enryakuji. This is my novice Koji." The captain's gaze slid to Miko. She kept her head bowed, her hands tucked into her sleeves. The wide brim of the straw hat hid everything but her chin. "A novice." The captain stepped closer. His shadow fell over her. "Show me your hands." Miko's heart stuttered. Her hands were too soft. She knew it, had known it since the patrol on the eastern road. A monk's hands should be calloused from work, from scrubbing temple floors and chopping wood. Hers were the hands of a general's daughter, trained on ink brushes and silk thread. She held them out, palms up. The captain took one and turned it over. His thumb rasped across her knuckles. "Soft," he said. "Like a girl's. The boy is young," Brother Eiji said, his voice utterly serene. "He has not yet earned his calluses. I took him from a farming village only last spring. His mother kept him at the loom." The captain grunted. He dropped Miko's hand and studied her face instead, his eyes narrowing at what little he could see beneath the hat's brim. "Take it off." Her fingers were steady as she lifted the hat. She met his gaze with what she hoped was the blank, placid expression of a boy who had nothing to hide. The captain stared at her for a long, crawling moment. Then he snorted and stepped back. "Get out of here. And if you see any Toyotomi fugitives on this road, you report them." "Understand." "Perfectly," Brother Eiji said, and bowed again. They walked on. Miko did not let herself exhale until the sound of hoofbeats had faded into the trees. The village was a scattering of thatched roofs and muddy lanes, crowded with refugees and stinking of fear. A ramshackle tea house stood at the crossroads, its shutters thrown open to catch what little breeze there was. Brother Eiji went inside to negotiate for provisions, and Miko lingered by the outer wall, pretending to adjust her sandal. 2 Tokugawa soldiers sat at a bench just inside, their helmets on the table between them. They were off duty, their voices loose with sake, and they did not notice the young monk pressing his back against the other side of the wall. "Says the hunters camped at Okawara," one was saying. 3 days now. Matsuda." The second soldier whistled low. "They've got him tracking that Fujita bastard, the one who got away at Osaka. Word is he's got a personal stake in it. Knew the man, or some such. Knew half the garrison from what I hear. That's why they hired him. Traitor's nose is better than any hound's." The first soldier laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Still, don't envy Fujita. Kaito's a cold bastard. I heard he put a knife through his own brother during the Kaga campaign, just to prove his loyalty to the shogunate. That's a rumor, so they say. Boots scraped on wood as one of them stood. Miko pressed herself flatter against the wall, barely breathing. The tanto was a line of cold fire against her skin. Okawara, she whispered to herself, tasting the name, when Brother Eiji emerged with a parcel of dried fish and 2 rice cakes. She was waiting by the road with her hat pulled low and her face smoothed into something like a novice's calm. He handed her a rice cake and studied her with those tea-colored eyes. "You look like someone who has found a direction," he said. Miko tucked the rice cake into her sleeve. "I have." She did not say that the direction was a village called Okawara, or that the man camped there was the traitor who had sold her father's life. She did not say that the tanto beneath her robes felt heavier than it had that morning, as though it had grown impatient. She only began to walk, and Brother Eiji, after a moment's pause, walked beside her. The road to Kyoto bent east through the valley. Okawara lay somewhere off that road, a day's walk at most. Miko counted the miles in her head and felt the hatred in her chest settle into something cold and patient, like a blade waiting to be drawn. The road grew busy as afternoon stretched toward evening. Farmers trudged past with loads of kindling on stooped backs. A woman leading a goat gave the 2 monks a shallow bow. Miko barely saw them. Her eyes tracked north, where the hills rose into darker ridges, the direction of Okawara, where Kaito's camp waited. The village announced itself with cook smoke before roofs came into view. A cluster of low wooden buildings pressed against the base of a sheer limestone cliff, defensive in its geography but open now, its gates unmanned. A stream cut through the settlement's center, wide enough for a water wheel that creaked and slapped with weary rhythm. Brother Eiji slowed his pace. "There is a small temple here. The nuns keep a guest hall." Miko said nothing. "Koji." Eiji's voice stayed gentle, but something in it made her stop. The old monk studied her face with those pale brown eyes, the color of weak tea, patient and unblinking. "You walk as though a rope pulls your chest. I have seen novices flee their masters. I have seen men run from debt, but you do not flee, you pursue." "I walk the same road as you," Miko said, lowering her voice to the boy's register she had practiced until her throat ached. "No," Eiji shook his shaved head. "You walk a road and I walk beside it. That is not the same thing." He did not press further. They entered the village. The temple stood at the northern edge, a modest hall with a moss-thick roof and a bell tower no taller than 2 men. A nun met them at the gate, old, smaller even than Eiji, with hands twisted by years of work and a face thin as winter paper. She wore plain grey robes and moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who had outlived most of her questions. "2 monks," she said, as if announcing the weather. "The guest hall is empty. Rice is cooking." Brother Eiji thanked her and disappeared inside to wash the road from his feet. Miko lingered in the courtyard. The nun watched her. "You are young for the road," the nun said. "I am old enough." "Old enough for what, I wonder?" The nun's eyes, black and still sharp, settled on Miko's face. "You have the look of someone tracking a ghost." Miko's hand twitched toward her ribs, toward the silk-wrapped weight of the tanto. She forced it still. "I heard there are soldiers camped nearby, Tokugawa scouts." The nun's expression flickered, not surprise but a quiet recognition of something unpleasant. "At Okawara. 3 lie north where the river bends. A tracker and his men, hunting some officer who escaped Osaka." "The tracker." Miko kept her voice flat. "I heard his name is Kaito." The nun's hand slowed on the rope of her own prayer beads. "Matsuda Kaito." The name landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. "You know him?" Miko asked. "I knew him, years ago, when this valley still belonged to the Toyotomi and men did not have to hide their loyalties behind shut doors." The nun looked out toward the darkening hills. "He and General Takeda Hiroshi used to stop at this temple on their way to the northern forts. 2 young warriors, barely past 20, with the world open before them. They would sit exactly where you are standing and talk until the moon reached its peak." Miko's chest tightened. She could picture it. Her father, grey-streaked hair not yet grey, broad-shouldered like winter mountains, laughing beside a younger Kaito whose face she had tried to forget and could not. "They were sworn brothers," the nun continued. "Inseparable. When Hiroshi's wife died in childbirth, Kaito was the one who carried the infant to the shrine for blessings. He stood at Hiroshi's shoulder through every campaign, every winter, every loss." Miko's voice came out rougher than she intended. "Then why did he sell the castle to the Tokugawa?" The nun went still. Her twisted fingers stopped on a single bead. The word was barely breath. "You are not simply a curious novice. I am passing through," Miko said, the lie thin and brittle. "I only want to understand. Understanding is dangerous." The nun turned her black eyes on Miko fully. "Kaito came back 3 months ago, alone. He stayed 1 night in this village before riding south. I asked him about Hiroshi. He did not answer, but his hands shook when he poured his tea. I have never seen that man's hands shake. Miko felt the tanto pressing against her ribs. I'm patient, hungry, a blade that held her father's last prayer. Carve only what must. Is he still at Okawara? She asked. The nun studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded toward the northern gate. Follow the river past the old lumber mill. His camp is in the clearing where the cherry trees once grew. But be careful, young monk. Whatever you seek there, you may find something else. The guest hall was a single room with straw mats and a small altar to Canon. Brother Eiji knelt before it, motionless, his breathing so slow that Miko could barely see his shoulders move. She sat against the far wall and did not pray. Her mind spun through the nun's words. 2 young warriors, inseparable. His hands shook when he poured his tea. She tried to fit these pieces into the shape of a traitor and found the edges cutting back at her. A man who sold his sworn brother's castle would not shake when remembering it. A man who killed his own brother during the Kaga campaign to prove loyalty. She had heard that in the tea house, that man would not carry an infant to a shrine for blessings, unless he would, unless men could be both things. You are burning, Brother Eiji said. Without opening his eyes, Miko started. I am sitting still. Your stillness is a fire. It crackles loud enough to disturb the dead. Eiji turned to face her, his creased face unreadable. What did the nun tell you? Nothing important. Then why do you clutch your chest as though something inside you wants to leap out? Miko looked down. Her right hand was pressed flat against the place where the tanto lay wrapped in silk, its water dragon inlay hidden beneath layers of black robe. She pulled her hand away. I carry something, she said. Something my father gave me. Eiji waited. He told me to use it only for what must be carved, but I do not know what that means anymore. Her voice cracked upward into something too raw, too high for a boy's voice, and she caught herself. I have a direction now. The man who destroyed my family is camped 3 li from here. I could reach him by midnight. Brother Eiji's lips parted slightly. And if you reach him, then I fulfill my father's prayer. Eiji leaned forward. The candle between them threw shadows across his face that made his gentle creases look like chasms. Young one, I told you a story on the road about a samurai who gave everything for vengeance. Do you remember how it ended? You said he found no relief. I said his vengeance was empty. The man he killed had long forgotten the crime. The only person still bleeding was the samurai himself. Eiji's breath stirred the candle flame. A blade can cut flesh or cut away delusion. Which edge you choose is a choice no ghost can make for you. Miko's jaw tightened. My father's ghost speaks to me. He cannot rest until this is done. Ghosts do not speak, Eiji said gently. The dead are silent. What you hear is your own wound echoing back at you, wearing your father's face. The words hit like a slap. Miko half rose, her hand moving to the tanto beneath her robes. You do not know what I have seen. No, Eiji agreed. He did not flinch from her sudden fury. But I know what I see now. A boy or not a boy, perhaps, carrying a weight too heavy for anyone's soul, and convinced that spilling blood will lighten it. It will not. I have buried too many men who believed otherwise. Miko's fingers curled around the wrapped hilt of the tanto. She could pull it free. She could show him. She could tell him everything. Her name, her father, the seppuku, the blood-smeared crest the ghost had tried to show her. The words gathered in her throat like floodwater. Against a dam, she swallowed them. I need to rest, she said. Eiji looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he bowed his head. Rest then. But know this, I will not stop you from walking out that door. Only you can choose what blade you carry and which edge you use. Sleep did not come. Miko lay on the straw mat, listening to the water wheels creak and the distant mournful call of some night bird in the hills. The candle burned down to a stub and died. Eiji's breathing slowed into the rhythm of deep rest. She closed her eyes and the vision came, not gently, not like a dream drifting in, but like a door kicked open. Cherry blossoms fell around her, pink and white, but they burst into wet scarlet as they touched her skin. She stood in the courtyard of Osaka Castle, and before her was her father, Takeda Hiroshi, grey-streaked hair pulled back from a scarred face, broad shoulders squared. But his throat was cut. The wound gaped dark and wet, and blood sheeted down his armor in a crimson banner. His lips moved forgive. She did not hear it. She saw the shape of the word, but her mind twisted it, caught it wrong, and what reached her ears was the word she had been carrying since the shrine. Avenge Hiroshi reached for her. His hand passed through her chest and closed around the tanto beneath her robes, and she felt the blade grow cold, then burning hot, then cold again. Prove yourself, the ghost said. Or the wound said, or the falling blood flowers said. I died while Kaito sleeps on silk. Prove you are my daughter. Miko woke with a ragged gasp, her hand already inside her robes, already gripping the tanto's ray skin hilt. The guest hall was dark. Eiji's breathing had not changed. She rose without sound. The monk's black robe fell from her shoulders and pooled on the mat. She unwound the straw traveling hat from her head and set it aside. The wooden prayer beads clattered softly as she placed them next to the robe. She stood in the darkness in her underrobe and the chest-binding strips torn from a dead soldier's undershirt. No longer a novice, no longer Koji, only Miko, General's daughter, carrying a blade that held her father's last prayer. She slipped through the temple gate and into the night. The river path glowed faintly under a sliver of moon. She followed its silver thread north, past the dark hulk of the old lumber mill, into the foothills where the cherry trees had once grown. The air grew colder. Her bare feet found the ground with the careful silence her father had taught her on hunting trips when she was small enough to ride on his shoulders. 3 li. 4. She lost track, then the trees opened, and she saw them. 2 campfires burning in a clearing, their flames licking upward at a sky that offered no answers. Tents clustered around the fires. The triple hollyhock crest gleamed on a banner staked near the largest tent, gold on black. And there, silhouetted against the nearer fire, a man stood with his back to her, broad-shouldered and still as a blade waiting to be drawn. Miko's hand tightened on the tanto. She stepped forward into the clearing. The darkness outside the camp was not silent. It breathed with the low murmur of men half asleep, the crackle of dying cookfires, the creak of leather and iron as a guard shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Miko had learned to read these sounds years ago. Crouched beside her father on hunting trips in the forests north of Osaka, his broad hand pressed flat against the earth as if listening for the heartbeat of the deer they stalked. Stillness is a weapon, he had told her. Patience is its edge. She had waited in the tree line for an hour, watching the patterns of the 2 campfires the nun had described. The larger fire, near the center of the clearing, had burned down to a heap of glowing coals. The smaller one, set closer to a low campaign tent hung with the triple hollyhock banner of the Tokugawa, still flickered with yellow flame. A single figure moved between them, not a sentry pacing a post, but a man tending the flames with the unhurried economy of someone who did not fear the dark. She could not yet see his face, but she knew. Miko circled the clearing to the north, bare feet silent on ground that had once known the roots of cherry trees. The stumps remained, cut low and weathered, their rings catching the firelight like staring eyes. She slipped past a snoring guard wrapped in a straw cloak, past a picket line where 2 horses dozed nose to tail, and emerged at the edge of the firelight so close she could smell the pine resin in the smoke and the sour tang of cold tea dregs. The man by the fire did not turn. He squatted on his heels, feeding a branch into the coals, and spoke without looking up. "You walk like your father." Miko's grip tightened on the tanto. The blade was still sheathed, pressed flat against her thigh, but the copper inlay of the water dragon caught a sliver of light and held it. "Stand and face me," she said. Her voice came out low and steady, though her ribs felt too tight for her lungs. Matsuda Kaito rose. He turned, and for the first time she saw him clearly, not as a shadow in a dying soldier's accusation, not as a younger man in a temple story, but as he was. He was lean where her father had been broad, built like a stalking wolf rather than a winter mountain. A close-cropped beard, shot through with grey, framed a jaw that looked as though it had been broken and badly set long ago. His left earlobe was missing, the scar a pale knot against sun-darkened skin. His eyes, set deep beneath brows that angled down toward the bridge of his nose, were the color of old iron. Tired, sunken, watchful. A short sword hung at his hip, but he made no move toward it. "I knew you'd come," he said, and his voice was not the voice of a man preparing to fight. It was the voice of a man who had been waiting a very long time. "Then you know why I'm here." Kaito's gaze dropped to the tanto in her hand. The blade whispered free of its sheath as she drew it, and the sound cut the air between them like a held breath released. He did not step back. He did not reach for his weapon. Instead, something shifted in his face, not fear, not anger, but a grief so old and so deep it seemed to hollow him out from within. "That blade," he said. "Let me see it." Miko lunged. She had trained with wooden swords since she was old enough to hold one, had practiced the straight thrust her father called the swallow's dive, had imagined this moment 100 times on the road from Osaka. But Kaito moved faster than any practice dummy, faster than any sparring partner. He sidestepped her thrust, caught her wrist with one hand, and twisted, not cruelly, but with the precision of a man who had disarmed 1,000 opponents. The tanto spun from her fingers and landed in the dirt. His other hand closed on her shoulder and forced her to her knees. It was over in 2 heartbeats. "You have your mother's fury," Kaito said, and his grip on her wrist gentled even as he held her fast. "But Hiroshi taught you better footwork than that. You rushed. He never rushed. Don't speak his name." Kaito released her shoulder and stepped back. He did not pick up the tanto. Instead, he crouched, pulled a small oil lantern from beside the fire, and held it over the fallen blade. The flame threw copper light across the inlay. The water dragon, coiled in its endless circle, swallowing its own tail. Kaito's breath left him in a sound that was almost a sob. Hiroshi, he whispered. Miko, still on her knees, watched his hands begin to shake. The lantern trembled and the shadows danced wildly across the clearing. I gave him this blade, Kaito said. His voice had gone rough, scraped raw. 30 years ago, we were boys playing at being men, heading north to our first campaign, he said. He said he would carry it until he could give it to his child. I told him he was a fool. He laughed. Miko stared at him. The cold hatred in her chest, the blade that had been waiting to be drawn, felt suddenly brittle. The nun's words came back to her. His hands shook when he poured the tea. You sold the castle, she said. You sold him. Kaito set the lantern down. He did not look away from her. I sold the castle because he asked me to. The words did not make sense. She shook her head, once hard. Lieutenant Fujita told you I betrayed him, Kaito said. Fujita was loyal to the end, but he was not in the courtyard when your father died. He was holding the eastern gate. He did not see. I saw, Miko said. The words tore out of her. I was there. I saw my father cut open his stomach, and I saw my mother's handmaid take his head because there was no one else. Where were you? Where were you, his sworn brother? Kaito's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached up and pulled aside the collar of his tunic, exposing the hollow beneath his left collarbone. A scar ran there. A deep, puckered wound, still livid at the edges, the kind of scar that came from a spear thrust or a sword tip driven home. I was under a heap of bodies in the inner bailey, he said. Your father dragged me out. He'd already taken a musket ball in the gut. I could see the black powder burn on his armor. He was dying, Miko, dying slow and hard, and the Tokugawa were 3 corridors away. He knew what they would do when they found him. A general's head on a spike, his body dumped in the river. You would have seen it. You would have lived the rest of your life with that image burned into your eyes. He let his collar fall back into place. He begged me to take his head before they came. He said it was the last gift I could give him, a samurai's death, by the hand of someone who loved him. I refused. I told him I would carry him out. He laughed, Miko. He laughed with blood running down his chin, and he said I was still a fool after all these years. Kaito's voice cracked, but he did not stop. He told me to take the offer the Tokugawa had made, to go to their side, to hunt their enemies, to keep my eyes open and my ears sharp, and he told me to find you, to keep you alive, to make sure you never raised a blade against me in ignorance, thinking I was the enemy. He picked up the tanto and held it out to her, hilt first. I have been tracking you since the night the castle fell. Not to capture you, to protect you. The Shogun's patrols are everywhere, and you walk like a ghost, but ghosts still leave footprints. I have been 2 hours behind you since the Eastern Road. When I reached the temple, the old nun told me a boy had come asking about me. I knew it was you. I came back here and waited. Miko's hand closed around the tanto's grip. The ray skin was warm from the fire, warm from Kaito's own palm. The dragon coiled beneath her fingers. You're lying, she said. You know I'm not. Her father's ghost rose in her memory, the cut throat, the mouth-shaping words she had refused to hear. Forgive not, avenge. Her own wound wearing his face, as Brother Eiji had said. The dead are silent. What you hear is your own wound echoing back at you. Her hand trembled. The blade trembled with it. The Shogun's net is closing, Kaito said. There is a pass, 2 days north, that leads into the mountains where no patrol will follow before the snows come. I can draw you a map. I can give you supplies. But you have to trust me, Miko. You have to let me do what I promised him. Something inside her broke. She did not decide to strike. Her body decided for her. The animal body that had walked barefoot through the dark, that had starved and hidden and clawed its way across 2 days of grief. She slashed upward with the tanto, and the blade bit through the sleeve of Kaito's tunic and into the meat of his forearm. He did not cry out. He did not pull away. Blood welled dark in the firelight and ran down his wrist, and he stood perfectly still, looking at her with those tired iron eyes. You think I wanted this, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Your father's blood is a stain on my soul, but it bought your life. Spit on his gift if you must. I will still guard it. Miko raised the tanto again. The blade was slick now, the water dragon swimming in red, and stopped because her father was standing behind Kaito. He was not the ghost she had seen before. The grey spectre with the severed throat, the accusing eyes, the mouth that shaped demands she could not meet. He was whole. He was as she remembered him from her earliest childhood, before the wars, before the grey streaked his hair and the scars mapped his face. broad-shouldered like winter mountains, his hair black and pulled back, his eyes, her own eyes, she saw now, the shape she had never been able to name. Bright with something that was not pain, he smiled. He lifted one hand, the fingers steady, and pressed it over his heart. Then he nodded, once, slow, certain, and looked at Kaito with an expression Miko had never seen him wear in life. Gratitude, love, the look of a man seeing his oldest friend and finding him worthy. The vision did not fade. It did not twist into blood and cherry blossoms. It held clear as starlight for 3 full breaths, and then it was gone, and Miko was standing in a clearing with a bloody blade in her hand, and a man who did not move to defend himself. She ran. She dropped the tanto. She did not remember dropping it, but her hand was empty when she turned and plunged into the tree line, and her bare feet found the river path by instinct, and the cold night air scraped her lungs raw. Behind her, Kaito did not call out. He did not follow. The last thing she saw before the forest swallowed her was his silhouette against the fire, kneeling in the dirt, one hand pressed to his bleeding arm, the other reaching for the abandoned blade that held her father's final prayer. The forest spat her out at the temple gate just as the sky began to bleed from black to grey. Miko's bare feet were raw, caked with mud and river silt and something darker that might have been her own blood. She did not remember the walk back. Only fragments, roots catching her toes, the cold hush of water, the image of her father's face pressing through the dark like a moon behind clouds. She found Brother Iji in the raked gravel courtyard, seated on the worn wooden step of the guest hall, his walking staff laid across his knees. He had not slept, his pale brown eyes, the color of weak tea, lifted to meet hers with a stillness that asked nothing and expected everything. Miko's legs folded beneath her. She landed on her knees in the gravel, and the sound that came out of her was not a word but a raw, splintered thing, a sob that had been waiting 2 days to be born. "I am not Koji," she said, and her voice cracked open. "I am not a boy, I am not a monk. I am Takeda Miko, and I tried to kill the man who loved my father more than his own life." Iji did not move. His face, a landscape of gentle creases, remained calm as still water. "I know, daughter," he said. "I have known since the Eastern Road." She looked up, her ragged crop of black hair clinging to her damp cheeks. "You knew? A young monk with soft hands who walks like a swordsman's child and carries grief like a blade." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "The robes do not make the monk, Miko, nor the boy." She told him everything, the seppuku, the tanto, the dying soldier's accusation, the camp at Okawara, Kaito's tired iron eyes and the spear scar beneath his collarbone. The truth he had laid at her feet like an offering. Her father's last command: take the Tokugawa offer, protect Miko, ensure she never raises a blade against me in ignorance. The slash she had carved into Kaito's arm. The vision of her father whole, pressing his hand over his heart, nodding with love for the man she had come to kill. Iji listened without flinching. When she finished, the silence between them held the weight of a stone dropped into deep water. "I left him bleeding," Miko whispered. "He gave me everything and I left him bleeding in the dirt." "He is not in the dirt now," Eiji said. Miko turned. Matsuda Kaito stood at the temple gate. He leaned against the weathered post, one hand pressed to his slashed forearm, the other holding the tanto. The blade was still smeared with his own blood, the copper water dragon swimming in red. His sun-darkened face was ashen beneath its grey-shot beard, and the broken line of his jaw stood sharp against the dawn light. But those old iron eyes were focused, steady, fixed on Miko with something that was neither anger nor reproach. He had followed her, even bleeding. Even after she had fled from him, he had followed. "You walk like your father," Kaito said, and the corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "Loud as a wild boar when you're hurting." Miko could not speak. She could only stare at the tanto in his hand, at the dark stain spreading through the cloth wrapped around his forearm. Iji rose slowly, his joints creaking like old wood. He crossed the courtyard and took the tanto from Kaito's hand with a gentle, unhurried motion. Kaito let it go without resistance. The old monk held the blade flat across both palms and studied it. The straight, unadorned steel, the ray-skin grip, the water dragon coiling in its endless circle. "Do you know the koan of the sword that gives life?" Eiji asked. Miko shook her head, still kneeling in the gravel. A young monk asked his master, "What is the sharpest blade in the world?" The master answered, "The one that cuts away delusion." The monk was confused. "But master, a blade cuts flesh. It kills." The master took the monk's sword and laid it before the altar. "This blade has killed," he said. "Now let it teach. Every morning you will polish it, and every morning you will ask yourself, what am I cutting away today? Life, or the lies that make life impossible?" Eiji turned the tanto so the copper inlay caught the first pale light of dawn. "A blade can cut flesh or cut away delusion. Which edge you choose, young one, is a choice no ghost can make for you." He held the tanto out to Miko. She did not take it. Her hands stayed at her sides, trembling. "I don't know how to choose," she said. "You already have," Kaito said from the gate. His voice was rough, scraped thin by pain and blood loss. "When you dropped the blade, when you saw him whole and you let the hatred fall, that was the first cut." Before Miko could answer, a sound cut through the morning stillness. The unmistakable rhythm of hooves on hard earth, more than a few, moving fast. Kaito's head snapped around. His body went rigid, every line of him sharpening despite the wound. "Tokugawa scouts. They must have followed my trail from the camp." "How many?" Eiji asked. Kaito listened. 6, maybe more. A full patrol. Miko scrambled to her feet. Her mind, exhausted and frayed, lurched toward a single thought. "They will find me. They will find him." The patrol captain with the grinding stone jaw would not fail to recognize a Toyotomi general's daughter a second time, not without her monk's robes, not with her hair grown ragged and her eyes red from weeping. Kaito pushed himself off the gatepost. The motion cost him. A fresh thread of blood ran from beneath his hand. But he straightened his spine and looked at Miko with an expression she had seen before, on her father's face, the night he knelt in the inner courtyard and told her to be still. "There is a path behind the temple," Kaito said to Eiji. "The nun showed me years ago. It follows the cliff face and climbs into the high pass. No patrol will follow before the snows." "I know it," Eiji said. Kaito nodded. He reached to his hip and drew his short sword, a plain, serviceable blade, unadorned. Then he looked at Miko one last time. "Miko." His voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "Your father's blood is a stain on my soul, but it bought your life. I will not let that purchase go to waste." He turned toward the gate. "Kaito," Miko said. It was the first time she had spoken his name without anger. "Your arm, stillness is a weapon." He did not look back. "Patience is its edge. Your father taught me that too. Now go." Eiji's hand closed around Miko's arm, firm, unyielding despite his age. He pressed the tanto into her palm and folded her fingers around the grip. The ray skin was still warm from Kaito's hand, still sticky with his blood. "The blade is yours now," Eiji said. "Carve only what must." He pulled her toward the back of the temple. Miko stumbled after him, her bare feet slipping on gravel, her eyes straining backward toward the gate where Kaito stood outlined against the grey sky. She saw him raise his sword. She saw the first horseman round the bend in the road and draw up short. She heard Kaito's voice rise in a shout, a challenge, a provocation, something designed to draw every eye and every blade. Then Eiji dragged her through the narrow gap behind the storehouse, and the temple walls swallowed the sound. The mountain pass was a wound in the earth, a narrow stone gullet that climbed through the cliffs above the temple. Eiji led with his walking staff, his sandals finding holds Miko could not see. She followed in a daze, the tanto clutched against her chest, her feet leaving bloodprints on the cold rock. Behind them, faint and distant, came the clash of steel, a cry, the savage whinny of a horse. Then nothing. Miko stopped. She turned back toward the sound, or the absence of it. "Do not," Eiji said, not unkindly. He made his choice. Let it mean something. They climbed in silence as the sun rose and the pass opened onto a high plateau dotted with wind-bent pines. The air thinned. The temple and the valley fell away behind them like a dream dissolving at the edge of waking. By midday they reached a small nunnery tucked into a fold of the mountain, a cluster of wooden buildings roofed with moss, half hidden by the pines. A thin thread of incense smoke rose from its courtyard. The nun who met them at the gate was younger than the one at the village temple, her face unlined but her eyes ancient with the calm of long solitude. Eiji spoke with her in low tones. Miko stood apart, still holding the tanto, still barefoot, still wearing nothing but her torn underrobe and the chest-binding strips that had once been a dead soldier's undershirt. When Eiji turned back to her, his pale brown eyes held something she could not name. "You will stay here," he said. "This place is hidden. No patrols, no scouts. The sisters will teach you what they know, and you. I am an old man on a pilgrimage to Kyoto." He smiled, the creases deepening. "I have walked far enough to know when a path ends and another begins." He placed a hand on her head, a benediction, light as a fallen leaf. "A blade can cut away delusion," he said, "but the hand that holds it must be steady. Let yours find its stillness, Miko." Then he was gone, his staff tapping a slow rhythm down the mountain path, and Miko was alone with the nuns and the pines and the long silence of the high places. Months passed. The snows came and buried the pass. Miko swept the courtyard, chopped wood, carried water. She sat in meditation while the wind howled through the pines and the incense curled toward the rafters. She bound her chest and wore the grey robes of a novice, and when the nuns spoke to her, they called her Koji. She did not correct them. That name, she had decided, was not a lie. It was a scar, and scars were true. in the deepest part of winter, on a morning when the light fell through the temple windows like water through ice, Miko knelt before the small altar in the meditation hall. Before her sat a carved wooden Buddha, its features worn smooth by centuries of incense and touch. She placed the tanto on the altar beneath it, the blade cleaned now, the copper water dragon catching the cold light. The ray-skin grip had darkened where Kaito's blood had soaked into it. No amount of polishing could remove that stain. She did not want to remove it. She closed her eyes and let her breathing slow. The cold air bit at her lungs. The silence pressed in, vast and complete, and then, without sound or shadow, the silence changed. She opened her eyes. Her father stood before the altar, Takeda Hiroshi, broad-shouldered as winter mountains, grey-streaked hair pulled back from a scarred face, his eyes bright with a light she had not seen since before the siege. He wore no armor. His throat was whole, unmarked. His hands hung relaxed at his sides. He did not speak. He did not need to. He looked at her, through her, and in that look was everything. The hunting trips in the northern forests, the lessons in stillness, the tanto pressed into her palm with trembling hands, the prayer she had not understood until now. Do not let hatred tarnish it. Let it carve only what must. Her father bowed once, deep and formal, the bow of a warrior to an equal. Then he straightened, and his form began to thin at the edges, unraveling like mist burned away by morning sun. Miko did not reach for him. She did not call out. She knelt in the grey light of the nunnery, her hands resting on her thighs, and watched him go. When the last wisp of him had faded, she looked at the tanto on the altar. The water dragon coiled in its endless circle, swallowing its own tail. Not a symbol of vengeance, she understood now, but of continuity, of what endures when the blade is laid down. She pressed her palms together. The prayer that came to her lips was not for the dead. It was for the living, for Fujita wherever he wandered, for Eiji on his long road to Kyoto, for Kaito who had traded his life for hers in a mountain valley with only the pines as witnesses, and for herself, Takeda Miko, who had been Koji and would be Koji still, who would carry her father's last prayer into whatever years the snows allowed. I will not let his spirit wander unavenged, she had sworn, but Hiroshi's spirit was not wandering. It was at peace, and she understood now, had been understanding, layer by layer, since the moment she dropped the tanto in the dirt at Okawara, that the truest vengeance was not a blade in the dark. It was a life lived for the heirs of the fallen. She rose. She left the tanto on the altar, beneath the Buddha's serene gaze. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The pines stood silent under their white burden. The path to the village was buried, and the war was over, and Miko had work to do.